Ladies and gentlemen, our next speaker for the day is going to be Latifa Al-Khalifa. She is a STEM certified educator and multi-award winning edupreneur. As the co-founder and CEO of Clever Play, an online and offline STEM education platform for kids aged between 4 to 12 years. She writes extensively on topics of STEM education and the future of education, and more broadly, she is passionate about changing the face of education in MENA region and beyond. Let's go ahead and welcome her on board.
Good morning, everyone. I'm really excited to be here with you today. And I'd like us all really to go on an adventure, right? And I'd like us to explore how we may use informal learning as a platform to cultivate STEAM curriculum or STEAM learning in early childhood. But before I do that, I'd like to start with a story. Meet my nephew, Ali. He's 6 years old. And our story, our Clever Play story, is really, it has been inspired by him from the very beginning. In fact, our story was, or perhaps started, in the most fitting birthplace for a learning company. And that, of course, is a school. In 2017, my sister and I experienced growing frustration with how the rigid structure of schools really dulled my nephew. He was brimming with curiosity. He has this natural ability to learn like all children. And as his aunt, as his mom, we were really determined to make sure that he was skillfully equipped for his future journey. So the best way for us to be able to really prepare him for what's to come is to try to make learning his friend, right? And try to make him love learning just as much as he loved fun, just as much as all kids love fun. And so we wanted to be able to give him an opportunity to develop these important skills that we've been hearing about from day one and day two: creativity, curiosity, communication, confidence, and imagination. But there was a problem. The school curriculum that he did go to did not teach these kinds of life skills that we wanted to embed in him. And we knew in our hearts that the code of the future really spelled out science, technology, engineering, arts, and math, or what is also known today as STEAM. And yet nobody really was working to make STEAM learning playful and fun enough for children. And so it was really at this point that the mission was born, and my sister and I decided to play our part in bridging the gap and creating the kind of change that we wanted to see in the world. So in my talk today, I really want to be able to focus on certain things and look at Clever Play as a case study, if you will, and see how you might want to integrate some of the things that we do into your own classrooms. And so what I'd like to touch on are three things in particular. One, how we bridge how we bring the adventure back in learning. And I think that's something that we take pride in, and I want to be able to share some tips so that you can also try to do the same in your own classrooms. Two is, of course, the proprietary learning pedagogy. And the last thing is, of course, our emphasis on the learning experience, which goes hand in hand with the pedagogy. But the first thing that I'd like to touch on is, of course, starting with why. Why does this even matter? Why are what are we trying to get out of, the pedagogy, out of the learning experience, out of the environment that we're trying to build? And so if we dive in deeper, the Clever Play learning philosophy is rooted in four things. We believe very strongly that learning is curiosity driven. Right? You see it all around you with children. They always have some questions, and then these questions bring on more questions. And when they're not satisfied with certain answers, they'll ask even more questions, which is absolutely fantastic because we believe that this is the best way to learn. But learning is also a creative process. It's not as straightforward. There's back and forth. You might make some mistakes. You might have to go back and redo it all over again. So there's a lot of creativity involved in learning. Learning is joyful. It should be, because that's when you realize that, you've learned something and you feel that joy and satisfaction that I learned something for the very first time. And we're big believers in STEAM education. So we believe that the overall umbrella is that STEAM actually empowers these children to go on to the world and bring their amazing solutions to the world problems all around us. So the core of the learning philosophy is really to be able to empower these children to go on to become curious creators. We understand today just how important the world needs creators. The world, we're looking for active participants. We're not looking for passive individuals anymore. We're looking to harness that curiosity over a lifetime and not let it, stifle, after school. So with our learning programs, let's say the overarching thing that we're trying to look at is when we provide children with these after school outlets to be able to really build on these, STEAM skills, but really also give them exposure and an opportunity to learn, and an opportunity to be exposed to these kinds of things early on really does go on to make a difference. And so with these kinds of learning programs after school for children who may or may not have been introduced to it, it goes on to spark their curiosity, and it allows them to not only build knowledge over time, but it allows them to build the life, the life skills that we're looking for, these valuable skills that are required in all aspects of, what they decide to do in the future. And so when we give our children an opportunity to learn STEAM early on, what that does is that it activates a greater interest in STEAM overall, and eventually that may land in these kids going on to pursue STEAM careers in the future. And so that's really the premise in which we operate. So now I'd like to touch on the what. So I talked a little bit about the why, which is empowering curious creators. But what is, again, a very important component of this entire puzzle. And the what really goes into the learning pedagogy. And at Clever Play, we primarily focus on 3 different learning pedagogies. The first one is the infinite learning loop. The infinite learning loop really looks at two different things, which is the making and the inquiry. And then there's obviously, an equilibrium between the two. And in there, we're looking at certain aspects related to the creative learning spiral, but we're also looking at the discovery method and giving children an opportunity to, to imagine, to create, to play. I know in the previous presentation, one of the participants mentioned, bring in the play in the sessions. Absolutely. Then, when we talk about the discovery method, we're looking at giving children an opportunity to see, to ask, to guess, to test, similar as scientists would do in laboratories today. And so this is a little bit more about, what the creative learning spiral is all about. So in every session or in every quest, we don't necessarily call our sessions sessions, but we actually call them quests because we take these children on skill building adventures. And in every skill building adventure, in every quest, there's either a creative learning spiral, methodology, or there's the discovery methodology. But the intention is always to give children an opportunity to imagine, to create, to play, to share, and to reflect, which is a core component of learning. And, very briefly here about the discovery method, again, just talking about, what are they seeing? Are they asking questions about it? They have to guess what this is in terms of, the project that they're trying to make. They have to test it out like they would in the real world, and they'd have to discuss it. And then it just goes on and on. So if you're looking at how might you want to transition, let's say, from a formal or semi-formal learning environment, and how you might want to transition or even introduce some informal learning components to your classrooms. One way to do this is really to move away from, usually the teacher initiated 5 W's, which is the who, what, where, when, and why, and bring it a little bit closer towards giving children an opportunity to generate activities that are primarily, sparked by their own interests, by their own passions. We know today that, when children are active participants in their learning journey, they are much more interested, they're much more, passionate about it, and there's a lot of buy-in. They're rooted and invested in what they're doing. And so that's really where we'd like to push them to be at. So this is when we're talking about the planned instructional units. But if we were to move to, pacing guides, like following a curriculum, what could be something that we could do to move away from the formal learning into more of the informal learning space? So oftentimes you would see, like an essential question that's being posed at the very start of a session or a class. And then, sometimes what ends up happening is there's, a specific, let's say, story, and then you can ask, who is curious today? But what we try to do really at Clever Play is to allow opportunities for creative play and interdisciplinary problem solving. This is, a huge component of, how we design the learning experiences. And the last one, of course, is the pedagogy. So, you're moving away from a closed loop into more of, like, as I mentioned, these clever quests where they start with stories and they end with sharing children's, projects, reflections, questions, and really building on that, maker mindset, empowering them not only with play, because we understand that, play is incredibly effective in the learning, in their learning journeys, but also in the importance of storytelling. And this is what we have found to be true in our own research that we've conducted, and which is why our pedagogy is, focused on not only storytelling, but also play. So we touched on the why, we touched on the what. The last thing that we need to touch on is the how. So how do we bring this all together? This is all great. We've touched on the pedagogy, we've touched on, like the why of empowering curious creators, but how do we really bring it all together? And I think one of the most important things, if not the most important thing in any learning environment, is actually the learning experience. And today, we are living in a almost like in a learning, an experience economy where everything really is just turning into becoming an experience and transforming itself. And learning is no exception. And so with Clever Play, what we do is we create a learning environment that is built on building future fundamentals. And, we emphasize the fun and fundamentals because it goes hand in hand. Fundamentals, of course, because, these kinds of skills are super important to be able to introduce to children early on in their early years, but also the fun component is hugely important. And so fundamentals with an emphasis on fun is the way that we really bring the learning experience to life. So how do we do this? In practical terms, we allow children to imagine and see themselves as superheroes. We know today that all children, adults too, myself included, we love superheroes. We see ourselves in them. There are certain qualities and values that we wish that we can carry with us on a day-to-day basis. And what we intentionally try to do is actually give children an opportunity to feel and act like STEAM superheroes, just as, they would see Batman or Superman or Wonder Woman as, these superheroes that they are. We want to be able to put these STEAM professionals on a pedestal and say, hey, a coder, a scientist, an astronaut, an artist, these are all superheroes too. And you can acquire these kinds of skills with the learning program that we offer. So we focus on two main aspects, which I've touched on just a few minutes ago. So the two are, giving children an opportunity to tinker just as much as they think. We want them to be able to think, of course, and reflect and go back and see how they might want to improve upon their project, etc. But we also give them opportunities in which they tinker, which is super important. And of course, because one of our core beliefs is curiosity, our entire pedagogy and curriculum is rooted in curiosity-powered learning. So to recap, the Clever Play experience, and I will be sharing some tips on how you can bring this into your own classrooms. In front of you are the ingredients of how we use what we use and how we do what we do. And we've been asked often, give us some tips on how we can improve the learning experiences. So here it is. The first one is, of course, that you would have to have it be child-led, right? So yesterday, one of the speakers was talking about the importance of moving away from, the teacher-led sessions. Oh, absolutely, couldn't agree more. So child-led is super important. I touched on the importance of storytelling. So starting with stories is really important. Transitioning from normal classrooms or sessions to quests to adventure brings that excitement into the learning process. Of course, open-ended activities and projects, hugely important. We believe very strongly in props. I talked about how we turn them into superheroes, like STEAM superheroes. So props play a huge role. When kids get to wear these different props, they feel empowered. They feel like they're taking on a different character, so to speak. We emphasis on badges, learning maps, etc. Because again, this just builds on the learning experience that we are trying to create. And then, of course, sometimes STEAM unfortunately gets a bad rep in terms of the kind of topics that that we cover, and that it's very black and white. And so we wanted to be able to change that entire thing and really give it like a facelift, if you will, with introducing it with theme-based adventures. So all of our sessions, they're not broken down into like science or robotics, etc., but actually lessons and themes that are inspired by children and co-created by children themselves. So this was something that we touched on yesterday, and one of the speakers spoke about the importance of redefining the role of the teacher. Again, we believe very strongly as well that today, the teacher's role is hugely important, and it's just not the same as it was once, that it was in the past, I should say. And so what we're trying to do is really be able to transform the role of the teacher given the different times that we're living in right now. So we call our teachers guides, and there are specific ways in which we try to really give them an opportunity to engage, excite, entertain, empower, because these are what we find are the core responsibilities of a clever guide. And so to be able to engage, excite, entertain, and empower, we train our teachers, we train our guides to create awe and wonder in the classroom, to engage, to create novelty, to invite curiosity, but of course, to also be very charismatic. And these 5 things, we found it to be incredibly useful in transforming the role of the traditional teacher and giving them an opportunity to see themselves in a completely different light. So this brings me to some clever tips that I'd like to share with everyone here today. And I hope that you find value in them and you get to use 1 or 2 of them, at least, in your classrooms. And there's a resource that I'd like to share with everyone towards the end of the presentation. So let's jump into it. So as I said, we believe that educators are rocket scientists, right? They're going to take their students out of this world, just by giving them the components, the ingredients that they would need to be able to really propel forward. And that's how we see the role of educators today. And I'm hugely grateful because I know that there are so many educators amongst us today. And so for the educators out there who would want to try a few of these different tips and bring them into the classroom, Here are 8 tips that we use day in and day out and have been using it for the past 4 years. So the first one is to design for interaction. That's really important, to be able to understand that, you have to be able to put in place certain elements of interaction, and you have to take into consideration how you would want to design this. The second one is to make learning relevant and personal. As we said, it's important to get the buy-in from the children themselves, because if they are invested in what they're doing, then they'd see a much higher return. The third thing is to be able to blend the maker centered and inquiry-based lessons. Really, really important to be able to not only give them an opportunity to question and inquire and think, but also to be able to give them opportunities to tinker and make and do. Number 4, to have thematic or story-based plans. As I said, personally, we are not big fans of your black and white, dry STEAM subjects. And so we infuse all of our lessons with theme-based stories that are actually co-created with the children themselves. And it's a blast, so whether it's, about theme parks, it's ice cream, it's, Toyland or Colorland, it's all these kinds of really amazing ideas that the kids give us, and we create themes based on their areas of interest. Number 5, have a reflection tool. So this is something really important, again, just to be able to really make sure that the learning sticks, is to be able to give children opportunity to reflect on their learning and not move on to the next thing until that reflection time has been given. Number 6, to create student portfolios. Again, it's really important in this day and age to not only show the children's work, but also to be able to give them an opportunity where they build on it, into the future, and to share it with their friends and family. Number 7, to gamify the learning process. Hugely important. The way that we do this, as I mentioned, is, to go on these skill building adventures, on these different quests. Upon completion of the quest, these children receive badges and they have their badge books and stickers, etc. So this really gives them, that feeling of, I want to keep going. And this is exactly what you want them to do. The last one is to celebrate failures. And we actually have like a failure celebration. So every time, a specific child fails at a specific project, we celebrate that failure. We give them an opportunity to talk about it and share what they've learned. This was a quote that I came across and I absolutely loved, so I'm sharing it here. It says, "Formal learning is like driving a bus. The driver decides where the bus is going. The passengers are along for the ride. Informal learning is like riding a bike. The rider chooses the destination, the speed, and the route," by J. Cross. So as we close today, I'd like to invite everyone to empower children really to take on their learning and their future. This is, our way of doing it, the Clever Play way. And thank you very much for listening. I'd love to hear some of your questions in the chats, and I'd love for you to reach out to me if there's a way in which we could work together, collaborate, partner. We are here for it. These are my, my details, my personal details. Feel free to reach out to me. And before we close, I want to be able to share a resource that I hope you find very useful. So we have it in Arabic and in English, specifically for educators, giving you more tips and tricks on how to incorporate informal STEAM learning in early childhood. All you'll need to do is just, grab your phone and take a picture of this QR code in front of you, and you'll be able to receive it into, your phone. So.
Thank you, Latifa. We have the questions posted on the chat on the Zoom link on the right-hand side. If you can read the questions, we have a couple of comments as well for you.
Absolutely, yes. All right, so we have from MIS Doha, I want to get some new tips to engage some challenging students in the class. Need to know some games to relate to core subjects of primary. Can you provide some links to integrate some subjects with the new pedagogy? All right, so I think one of the best ways in which you want to engage, challenging students would be to go back to, their personal areas of interest, and just having a chat with them and seeing like, what are you primarily interested in? Because again, what we found to be true in our case is when we give children an opportunity to talk, and we get to hear from them, they feel like they're being heard. And then of course, depending on how you'd be able to create a curriculum, perhaps something that would match their areas of interest or supplement it somehow, I think is hugely important. But I think the first step is to really try to get personal with the students and to understand what's working for them, what's not working for them, and how to improve it. Thank you very much for your question. Okay, the resources are mind-blowing, will definitely enhance my knowledge to cater. Thank you very much. Very nice. We're using Clever in our school. Oh, we'd love to hear from you. Parents sometimes are bookish. They hate teachers giving you things that are not in their children. What are the key requirements for schools to introduce new tools, software, online? How can we get students? All right, this is a great question. So yes, sometimes you would find parents, being reluctant about introducing something new. But what we found to be true, honestly, because we work with parents like directly, because we have a location in Bahrain, but we also work with a lot of schools. And what we found is that parents, once you start to give them that bigger picture of what is this going to do for their children, and parents, they're looking for results. Again, I'm an aunt, my sister is a mom. We understood the importance of this, and this is why we exist today. So if you speak that same kind of language to the parents and say, hey, we understand where you're currently coming from, and we know just how important this is to supplement your child's learning. And this is what we're trying to do as a school, to be able to introduce something new and fun. You would find a lot of buy-in, honestly, especially, when you look at the kinds of skills that are being developed in a program like ours. You would find a lot of buy-in from the parents and the schools. In fact, that has been our experience. We've had really amazing responses. We're working with schools in the United Arab Emirates, soon to do so in Saudi Arabia as well. So if you are looking to introduce our Clever Play program into your school or nursery, feel free to reach out.
Latifa, could you put the QR code once again, because a few delegates are asking for the QR code?
Yeah,
and
can
I
you
think we
see
need yeah. And could you also, there's 1 more minute for hard stop. So
yes, absolutely. So I'm just going to take this one question. How will you make your class more interactive on an online platform? Okay, so this is also a very nice question. So how will you make your class more interactive on an online platform? There are a lot of online tools, honestly, that you could use to be able to bring that interaction. If you're using Zoom, Zoom alone has, added a lot of different features, like interactive features, and like are giving you an opportunity to integrate different apps into the Zoom application itself. So if you're only using Zoom as your video conferencing platform, then you can use the sketching app to be able to do that, to give children an opportunity to interact with you. There are ways in which you could give them these like mural and others where they could in real time write their thoughts, etc., and you get to see it. The idea of celebrating failures, absolutely. I think one thing that you could do is you could ask them, what did you fail at today? What did you fail at this week at the end of your session? I think that's really important. So I think this brings me to the end of my session. Time is officially up, but I'm really honored to be here with you. Thank you very much for all of your questions, and please feel free to connect with me. I'll be, networking, and we'd love to see you around. Thank you very much for listening.
Such an enlightening session. We all enjoyed it. Thank you so much for being with us today.